Okay, in this video, I'm going to actually, let me back up here. So this is set 5 of the practice problems, and I'm going to do 9, 10, and 11. Okay, so we want P or not Q. The only way to get this is to use the negation elimination rule. There's no way to build it out of what we have just in this one premise. So our assumption is going to be the opposite of what we want, ultimately. So not, in parentheses, P or not Q. Okay, so this is the correct assumption, but making this assumption doesn't create any new possibilities for what we can do. So we need to make another assumption. And this takes a little bit of guesswork, but I can tell you I think what we want is Q. So now that we have Q, we can get P by doing conditional elim 1 and 3. All right, so in this second subproof, we need a contradiction, and that contradiction is going to be with what we have on line 2. So if we use disjunction introduction on line 4, we can get P wedge not Q, and then if we move down the not, in parentheses, P wedge not Q, are 2, then we have a contradiction. These two lines contradict, so contradict each other. So on line 7, outside of this subproof, we put not Q, and that's negation intro 3 through 6. Oops. All right, so now that we have not Q, we can do disjunction intro again on line 7 and get P wedge not Q. And so again, that's going to be a contradiction with what we have here on line 2. So we're going to move that line down again. Okay, so again, obviously we have a contradiction here. So we can discharge the first assumption that we made. And we do that with negation elim again. Or negation elim, we used negation intro before, I guess. And that's going to be, let's see, 2 through 9. All right, there we go. Okay, we'll start, again, we're going to use negation intro or negation elim, and we'll start by assuming the opposite of our conclusion. Okay, but again, we still can't do anything with what we have on lines 1 and 2, so we need to make another assumption. And that, let's see, let's try P. And again, this first assumption that we're making here, if we know that we're using negation intro or negation elim to get the conclusion, then we know what this assumption should be. It should be the opposite of what we want, ultimately, at the end of the proof. The second assumption takes a little more guesswork, and you may have to try different things. But it looks to me like P is going to be what we want. So we'll try that. So now on line 4, we can do disjunction intro again. And that's going to give us contradiction with what we have on line 1. So we'll move that down. Okay, so now on line 6, we can put not P, negation intro, what do we got here, 3 through 5. Okay, so I assumed P here on line 3, and then pretty easily I was able to get my contradiction, and so we end up with not P. Now, here on line 2, we've got not, and then in parentheses, not P and not Q, and I have not P here. If I can repeat what I did on 3 through 5, except using Q instead of P, then I'll end up with not Q. And I know that if I put them together with conjunction intro, then I will have a contradiction with what's on line 2. So that's my plan of attack. I need to make another assumption. That's going to be Q. Okay, and so again, I know that down here on line 10 or 11, I'm going to end up with not Q. So let's see. P wedge Q. And then again, I'm going to move down. What's on line 1? So there I've got a contradiction. Not Q. Negation intro 7 through 9. All right. So again, I've got not P and not Q. If I put them together, conjunction intro, we got 6 and 10. Okay, so this on line 11 is a contradiction with what's on line 2, so I just need to move line 2 down. Okay, so now on line 13, I can use negation a limb to discharge this first assumption that we made. So this is a contradiction, so the opposite of what we assumed on line 2. Not P and not Q. Let's see here. That is, what did I say? Negation a limb 2 through 12. Okay. And actually, I just realized I should have said this back when we were on line 10. Here I have not P and not Q, and I put them together, not P and not Q. That is the contradiction, but we weren't finished here on line 11 because we were still inside this first subproof. So we have to get out of this subproof, and we can only do that by getting a contradiction. So we got the contradiction. That gets us back along the main line of the proof, and so this can be our conclusion. Okay, so C and, D double arrow F is what we want, so we're going to assume the opposite of that. And just to remind you, so obviously in all three of these, we're using negation intro or negation a limb, and so our assumption is the opposite of what we want. Don't forget that we also make assumptions when we do conditional intro, and so when we do that, we're approaching the assumption in a different way. In those cases, when we know we're going to be using conditional intro, our assumption is the antecedent of the conditional that we ultimately want. That is what comes before the arrow. But for all these, we're just locked into negation intro, negation a limb. All right, so that's our first assumption. Now, let's see. Actually, this one's going to be pretty similar to what we just did. So we will assume not C. Wedge intro, line 3. Okay, so this, what we have on line 4, is the opposite of what we have on line 1. So we want to move that down. negation elim, let's see, 3 through 5. Okay, so we got C by doing this little subproof. We want to do the same thing again to get D double arrow F, D if and only if F. So we'll assume not D double arrow F. Okay, now we want to bring down line 1 again. Except, I need another parentheses there. Okay, lines 8 and 9 are contradictions, so on line 10 I can put D double arrow F. That is negation elim, 7 through 9. All right, now I can put what's on line 6 and line 10 together with the conjunction introduction rule. All right, so this is what I was saying up here after I'd finished the proof. Right here, we have our contradiction, C and D double arrow F. However, we're not finished because we're still inside this subproof. You can't end a proof inside a subproof. We have to discharge this assumption and get back to the main line of our proof. So, although we have our conclusion on line 11, we're not done. So on line 12, we want to put not C and D double arrow F. Need that and that. Did I do that right? Yeah. Okay, so that is reiteration line 2. Okay, so now I have a contradiction on lines 11 and 12. So on line 13, I put the opposite of the assumption that we made on line 2, and that is going to be the conclusion that we can use as the conclusion. Negation elim, 2 through 12. Okay, good. Okay, just one other thing to point out for if you're curious. So students sometimes think about, if you have a not outside the parentheses, they think about how it might be distributed. There are different ways to do that depending on what's inside the parentheses. The most straightforward way of distributing is what we have here in these two proofs, in 10 and 11. So we distribute the not sign inside the parentheses, and we change a wedge to an ampersand. So not, then in parentheses, P or Q becomes not P and not Q. So this is the correct distribution, and we've just provided a proof to show that it's a distribution that we can do. Similarly, here we distribute the not, and so we end up with not C, so those two knots cancel out. We change the wedge to an ampersand again. Again, we have a double not here, so those cancel out, and so we get C and, in parentheses, D double arrow F. We can also go the other direction. If this was an ampersand here, then, again, this would be not P and this would be not Q, but this would be a wedge here. All right, I'll stop there. Good luck.